Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah, daf Lamed Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by the Levy family in honor of Meital Melamed for finishing her year-long study of Masechet Megillah as part of her Bat Mitzvah preparation. We're very proud of you. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started with the continuation, really, of the machloka between Rebbe and the rabbis regarding Kriyat Shema. If you remember, Kriyat Shema was listed in our Mishna as one of the things that does not need to be said specifically in Hebrew, could be said in any language, but we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, it's actually a debate between Rebbe and the rabbis. Rebbe says it has to be said in Hebrew. Why? Because it says v'hayu, and these words should be meaning v'hayu the way they were written. Okay, then the rabbis say, what do you mean? It says Shema. You have to hear, you have to understand. Right? Here doesn't just mean hear. Hear means understand, and therefore it must be in a language you understand. So now we're going to ask a question, and something someone asked after class yesterday, which is Lema Kasav Rebbe, Hola Torah b'chol lashon emra. Can we infer from here well, it's a bit of a debate what exactly this means, but that all of the Torah was said in any language. And therefore, according to Rebbe, what's Rebbe saying? All of the Torah can be recited in any language. In a minute, we'll get to what does it mean, the Torah being recited. What are we talking about? We'll get there in a minute. But let's get the principle first, because Shema has to be said in Hebrew. So Shema, basically, V'hayu is an exception to the rule. So they say, again, let's just read it in sound, and then we'll explain what we even mean by this Kol Torah b'chol lashon emra. But if we assume that the Torah can be said in any language, that would make more sense according to Rebbe. Because if you think the whole Torah can only be said in Hebrew, then you don't need a drasha to teach you that specifically Kriyat Shema is different. To which the Gemara answers, no. It's true. You don't necessarily have to say that. You could say that all of the Torah is actually only in Hebrew, but Mishum Dechtiv Shema, because it says Shema, you might have thought that Shema is an exception to the rule. Comes V'hayu to teach you, no, it's not an exception to the rule. So basically, it doesn't really teach you about all the Torah. Now, what does this mean? The Torah was said in Hebrew, recited in Hebrew. What are we talking about? It's a good question. Rashi says, Likrot bebeit hakneset. What we're talking about is when we do the public reading of the Torah in shul on Shabbatot, on Mondays and Thursdays, that maybe that could be done b'chol lashon, and that's what we're discussing here. Okay, which in the end they don't conclude. It's not clear. It could be either way. Some people say, what is Rashi talking about? Like this would have to be a Torah law. That's not a Torah law. So some people say maybe it means Parshat Zachol and things that are Torah law that have to be read. Maybe it means, Tosfot suggests elsewhere, not Tosfot on our daf, that maybe Rashi means chalitza. And in other words, all the ceremonies that are written in the Torah that have to be said, the masro, any bikurim that have to be recited, maybe that's what he's talking about. It's unclear exactly what the Gemara is discussing here. And it's unclear when Rashi means the krot bebeit knesset. Everyone tries to kind of explain Rashi. They couldn't possibly mean all the parshiyot. Maybe we just mean something, more limited. Anyway, there's a big debate what exactly this means. It's similar to the debate we saw yesterday that all the Torah was written on the stones. What is all the Torah? All the Torah doesn't always mean all of the Torah. Okay, now, again, this is a bit of a different Kol Torah, and what does it mean, Ne'emra? But anyway, we'll leave that aside. Let's move on. We're now going to have the mirror sugya to that, which is Lema Kasav Rabbanan, the way we suggested that Rebbe thinks that the Torah must be in any language and Shema is an exception. Well, then we would make the same suggestion according to the rabbis, but in the reverse direction. Since the rabbis say Shema can be said in any language, maybe they hold Lema Kasav Rabbanan that all of the Torah has to be said only in Hebrew, and Shema comes to teach you, but not Shema, right? Because it says here, it means not when you read the Shema. Because if you said in any language, Shema what do you need Shema for? If all of the Torah could be recited in any language, then we recite Shema in the morning and at night, right? We say it 2 times a day. Obviously, then you could say it in any language. So you wouldn't need a drasha to teach you that, to which the Gemara says, you can already guess this. No, you could say that all of the Torah has to be said in Hebrew, and could be said in any language. Shema also could be said in any language, but why do you need a drasha? Because it's mishum dichtiv v'hayu. Because of the v'hayu that Rebbe tries to use to prove has to be said in this particular way. Well, Shema comes to teach you, no, don't think that. Okay, and therefore we don't come to any conclusion really about what this teaches us. According to even according to each of them, we don't know. Does the whole Torah need to be said specifically in Hebrew or in any language? We really don't know. Now we get to a very interesting topic, tefillah. Okay, and this I'm going to actually go off the daf a little bit at some point, and we'll talk about halacha l'maaseh because it's a very fascinating topic. Tefillah. So why can tefillah be said in any language? This is instead of all the others where it's a drasha from the pasuk, this is just a very clear logical explanation. Rachamehi. What is tefillah? It's bakasha rachamim. It's asking God for mercy. So obviously, right? Any way you want to daven, you can daven. You can daven to God in any way you want, in any language you want. Because the whole idea, and I would say this further, you need intent when you daven. You need to be thinking about the words. You need to understand what you're asking. So of course, it can be said in any language. To which the Gemara questions, wait a minute. Tefillah b'chol lashon? How could you possibly say tefillah in any language? V'hama Rav Yehuda, didn't Rav Yehuda say, La'olam al yishal adam tzrachav b'lashon Aramit? A person should never ask for their needs, which we assume equates with tefillah. Keep this in mind. Remember these words. We're going to come back to them later. You shouldn't ask for your needs in the language of Aramaic. Why? Damar Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Yehuda quotes Rabbi Yochanan saying, Kol ha'sho'el tzrachav b'lashon Arami, and malachei hasharet nizkakim lo. The angels won't help you. And the idea here is that the angels are the ones that bring your prayers to God, that there's a middleman, I should say, but not middleman, right? Middle angel that brings your prayers to God. And what's the problem? So what? Why can't it be in Aramaic? The angels don't understand Aramaic. Okay, interesting. Why don't they understand Aramaic? They don't understand Aramaic. Okay, soon we're going to question, do they really not understand Aramaic? We seem to have sources that they do. Okay, but right now, okay, we have a few questions. Number one, we're going to get back to this. Is it only she'elat tzrachim? There's parts of prayer that aren't she'elat tzrachim. Is it only Aramaic, or is it any other language? Is it that the angels don't only understand Hebrew, or is it specifically Aramaic? Some commentaries say that what's wrong with Aramaic over all other languages? Possibly it's only Aramaic. What's the problem with Aramaic? Aramaic is a distortion of Hebrew, like a ruining of the Hebrew language, because it's similar to Hebrew, but different. That's one possible way to understand it. Or maybe it means any other language. So we basically have this issue that you're not supposed to say your prayers in Aramaic because the angels won't hear. By the way, where do we see this? So Yikorn Porkan, for example, that we say on Shabbat, that's in Aramaic. You don't say that if you're davening by yourself. There's prayers in Slichot. If you say Slichot by yourself, besides the Yud Gimel Midot, you're not supposed to say on your own, although you can if you read them with Tamei Mikra, but you shouldn't say it in Aramaic because specifically, right, the prayers at the end there that are Aramaic, you don't say, well, I'm already jumping the gun. If you're an individual, we're going to talk about the individual part in a minute. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. Okay, and yes, there's a whole interesting thing about Kaddish being in Aramaic and specifically why it's in Aramaic and specifically has to do with the angels. So there's, sorry, I forgot. I looked it up. I saw it. I have to come back to it. Maybe I'll try to look it up for tomorrow and get back to you about it. But there's something related to this sugya about specifically why Kaddish is in Aramaic. Okay, anyway, sorry for jumping the gun. Let's go back. Sorry, this stuff is just too interesting that I didn't want to not say it at the time, but let's hold off for a minute. So now, they have, on the one hand, tefillah can be said in any language in the Mishnah. Then we have that Rabbi Yochanan says, or Rabbi Yehuda quotes it, but based on Rabbi Yochanan, that the angels don't understand Aramaic, then we can't ask for our needs in Aramaic. To which the Gemara answers, which I already kind of gave away, Lo kashya habi yachid habi tzibur. An individual can't pray in any language. Why? Because or in Aramaic. It's unclear. Do we mean in any language? Do we mean specifically Aramaic? Because when the individual prays, we need the angels to be the intermediaries to bring our prayers to God. When the community prays, and this is why, one of the reasons why Tefillah B'tzibur is so important, is because there's this understanding that the prayers go directly to God, and you don't need an intermediary. If you don't need an intermediary, you can say it in Aramaic, and that explains what I was trying to say before, which is there's certain prayers that we won't say as individuals because they're in Aramaic. So if we're by ourselves, we don't say them because we need an intermediary to bring them to God, and therefore the intermediaries don't understand Aramaic, we don't say it. Now, we'll come back to this soon because there's something important that we didn't discuss yet. But before we get there, the Gemara says, really? The angels don't understand Aramaic? So we started off with prayer can be said in any language. We said, really? But you can't use Aramaic? We answered, individual, community. But now we have a question of V'hatanya Yochanan the angels don't understand Aramaic. V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Yochanan Kohen Gadol? We're now going to have two stories of Kohanim Gedolim. While they were in the Kodesh Kodeshim, two separate occasions, they heard a prophecy, a bat kol, a heavenly voice, which we assume means an angel, saying the following thing. And in both cases, the angel spoke in Aramaic. So that would imply that angels speak in Aramaic and understand Aramaic. So the first story is Yochanan Kohen Gadol. This is from the Shomronim times. Shama bat kol mi beit Kodesh Kodeshim shu omer. You heard a heavenly voice come out. Again, whether the heavenly voice came from the Kodesh Kodeshim or he was in the Kodesh Kodeshim when he heard it, saying, Nitzachu Talaya. You can already hear it's Aramaic. Okay, Talaya are the young children, the young fighters. One, they went to fight this battle against Antiochia. Vishuv Maaseh b'Shimon HaTzadik. And there was the case of Shimon HaTzadik. Sheshama bat kol mi beit Kodesh Kodeshim. We're now jumping ahead, presumably. Okay, there's a debate about this, but we're going to talk about Gas Kalgas, which some people say is Gaius, who was living just before about 30 years before the Korban, or 30 to 50 years before the Korban. He's also known as Caligula. Okay, he's mentioned in Josephus. So possibly we're discussing this story where, and it makes sense in terms of what they're saying. One of the things it discusses in Josephus is he tried to bring an idol and bring it into the temple. It was delayed what he wanted to do for a while, and then he was killed in the interim, and it never happened. So possibly that's what this is talking about. And then Shimon HaTzadik would have to be the later. There's two Shimon HaTzadik, have to be the later one that was living at the end of the Second Temple time. So there was a Maaseh with Shimon HaTzadik. He heard a bat kol coming out of the Kodesh Kodeshim, or while he was in the Kodesh Kodeshim, Shu Amar Betelat Avedata Da'amar Sin'a La'ai Te'alei Chala. Okay, what they wanted to do to the Heichal, whether it was a fleet of an army that was supposed to come into the sanctuary, well, it was canceled. Okay, the Sna'a is the Soneh, our enemy. V'neherag Gaskalgus, and Gaskalgus was killed. Ubatluk Zechotav, and all the things he wrote to do against the Jews, right? All of his decrees were ripped up. V'vikatvu Otah Sha'a v'chivnu. And then when they heard that heavenly voice on both occasions, they noted exactly what time of day it was. And then they checked back and they found out that the war was won exactly at that moment that he heard the heavenly voice, and the Caligula, or whether it's Caligula or Gaskalgus, was killed exactly at that moment, and this prophecy was true. Anyway, the point being that they speak Aramaic. Here you have this messenger coming, this heavenly voice. So what do they answer, right? And this was in Aramaic. So two possible answers. A bat kol is different, possibly. You could say a bat kol is different, and it's given by a particular angel who does know Aramaic. And why is that? Because what's the point of the bat kol? So people understand. And if people speak Aramaic, then he has to speak in a language they understand. That's different from the angels who hear our prayers and bring them to God. They don't need to understand Aramaic, and we should just therefore not daven in Aramaic. Option number two, Gavriel Hava. There was one angel, right? Both are basically saying there's an angel that knew either the bat kol one, or maybe it was Gavriel. Why Gavriel? Well, Gavriel is known to know all the languages. How do we know this? When Joseph went to Egypt, there's a midrash that says, how did he know to speak? Egyptian. So, right, I'm thinking of the words in the song in Joseph, right? And I don't speak Egyptian very well, right? So according to this, Gavriel came and taught him Egyptian. Okay, and taught him all the different languages so he'd know how to be a leader there. Okay, now we get to halacha l'maaseh, because if you just take our sugya, what does it seem to say? If you're an individual praying, you can't pray in any other language, or possibly you can't pray only in Aramaic. We don't know, okay? Which would be easy for us because we don't speak Aramaic anyway in general. I mean, maybe now you speak a little Aramaic, but we wouldn't think to pray in Aramaic. So either it's just Aramaic, or, right, and again, it's just an individual, but a prayer community can do their prayers in English. Well, what happened here? So the Shulchan Aruch basically paskins, and I'll read it inside. We're now in Hilchot Tfilah, in Orach Chaim, Siman Kuf Aleph, 101, in section 4, okay, in paragraph 4. You can daven in any language you want, according to the Shulchan Aruch, but only as a group, but as a community. But an individual can't, only in Hebrew. Some people say, I'm just kind of showing you how the halacha comes about here. Remember, he said, only when you're asking for your needs. Maybe an individual who prays, okay, if you're praying for a particular sick person, if you're praying because something bad is going on in your life, that you have to say in Hebrew. But maybe when it means tzibur, it means even communal prayer, even if you're saying it as an individual. So if you're davening your regular Shemona Esrei that you say every day, maybe you could say that in English as an individual. And some people say, and that's all based on the words of Rabbi Yochanan, who said it's she'elat tzrachim specifically, right? It was Rabbi Yehuda who said it, and Rabbi Yochanan. Al yishal adam tzracha, but it didn't say don't pray your daily prayer. Next thing, v'yeshomrim da'av yachik sho'el tzrachav yachol lish'ol b'chol lashon sheyirtzeh chutz milashon Aramaic. Some people say it's only Aramaic, but any other language is fine also. And then that would mean any individual can pray anything they want, say anything in any language that they want, and obviously the community. Okay, so you see here this, right? All these options, by the way. Some people say if you pray for a sick person in their room, since the sick person, the Shekhinah is there, and your prayers go directly to God, you also could say it in any language. So there's all sorts of ways of getting around this. However, and now you might look around and say most, right, Orthodox synagogues in general pray only in Hebrew. And this is one of the big issues that became an issue when, right, in the time of the Chatam Sofer, which we're going to quote in a minute, and you're going to see why he did this. He was reacting to the changes that were going on in communities where they were starting to say, let's say our prayers in languages that we understand. And he went out very strongly against it. And what happens is the Chatam Sofer ends up saying things that are against the halakha, basically, in order to preserve what he kind of created, which was orthodoxy, right, which didn't exist before the Chatam Sofer. And it was that was a whole innovation as a reaction to the changes. So if you look in the Mishnah Berurah, he starts off with okay, so the Mishnah Berurah is in Russia in the late 1800s. He starts saying, despite everything it says here, we now say, but it's better to daven in Hebrew. And then he quotes the Chatam Sofer. He says here in his tshuva, he brought all these proofs that the fact that people said you could do it in any language, that's only be'akai. He all of a sudden says, that's only if it's not done in a regular set manner, right? Every daily manner. Okay, but to have it all the time, and to have a shliach tzibor come up a chazan, and then he says, what's going to happen? People are going to forget Hebrew entirely. There's no way this is what they meant in the Gemara. And then he says, the Mishnah Berurah adds, right, because of a whole bunch of reasons. Okay, all the geonim of our time started saying, and they started saying it's absolutely forbidden to daven in any language. You can see what's going on here. And then he says it, and this is to go against sects that are developing, and they basically turned all our prayer into the language of the nation. And now slippery slope, as he calls it, one sin causes another. They changed the blessing of going back, right, the ingathering of the exiles. And they got rid of that, not wanting to go back to Jerusalem. And basically he says they're changing, right? In other words, if it was just changing the language, that would be one thing, but because they're changing the language and they're changing other things, so basically, and they want to forget Yerushalayim, they also want to forget Lashon HaKodesh. And therefore, basically he goes out against it and says, there's no way, right? This is just going to cause heresy. So in the end, the whole, right, becomes this tirade against people who do this, even though according to the basic halacha, there's absolutely no problem. But it's obviously what they said was, well, this is what it's going to cause it. Therefore, we can't allow it. Very interesting. Sugya, there's a lot more to be said, but we're going to stop here. Okay, back to our sugya. Birkat HaMazon. So if you remember, right, we're now just going through. We got to Shema, now we're on Tefillah. We just did Tefillah, now we're on Birkat HaMazon. The blessing, the grace after meals. You're supposed to eat, be satiated, and then you bless God. What does it mean to bless God? To thank Him. Obviously, you could do that in any language, any language that you want to bless. Shvuat ha'edut. So now this is someone claims you saw testimony and you swear you didn't, and it turns out you lied. Come forward and you say, I lied, you bring a sin offering. So Shvuat ha'edut, if you took that oath saying, I don't know testimony for this in any language, you'll be liable to bring a sacrifice. Dichtiv, as it says, v'nefesh ki tachta v'shama kol Allah. It's a bit of a difficult pasuk to understand. Someone who sins and heard the voice of an oath. What it basically means is that someone made you take an oath. In other words, it wasn't just you said, I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. But someone said, swear that you don't know anything because I'm pretty sure you do. And you came forward and you swore. Now, the language is a little strange. It said, Sham'a kol Allah. He heard, really, he swore. He didn't hear a swear, an oath. So how did they explain this? B'chol lashon shehi shomat. What it means is anything in any language, it could be heard or understood. So therefore, that's how we get from that strange usage of the word sham'a would be any language. Shvuat pikadon, well, that's easy. Once you have Shvuat ha'edut, we're going to learn from there to Shvuat pikadon, because the pasuk about the edut, the testimony, says v'nefesh ki tachta. And the pasuk about the Shvuat pikadon, where you say, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't have this item in my house anymore, okay, whether you say it was stolen or whatever you say. So it also says nefesh ki tachta. So the same word, tachta, gzera shava, we're going to learn from one to the other. Ate tachta mishvuat ha'edut. That's the end of the list of all the ones that can be said in any language. Now we get to the ones that are said in Hebrew specifically. You might remember we learned bikurim, it says anu v'amru. They learned from the brachot uklalot where it says anu v'amru, since that's only in Hebrew, this is also only in Hebrew. Chalitza, we had two answers. We had one to say same thing, v'anta v'amra. So when you have aniyah and amira, we learned it again from the brachot uklalot. What we didn't explain yet, which we're going to get to here, is how do they know the brachot and klalot have to be only in Hebrew? The Mishna didn't explain that. The other opinion said it was kacha, because it says this is how it should be done, this meaning in this way, only this language. So we're going to go through all that. An mikra bikurim kitzad. So how do we get bikra bikurim? V'anita v'amarta l'fnei Hashem lokecha u'lahalanu omer. There's a quote from the Mishnah. V'anu al-leviim v'amru el kol ish Yisrael. Ma'ani amura la'alam b'lashon hakodesh, af kam b'lashon hakodesh. So again, anu v'amru by the leviim. That's in Hebrew. This is also in Hebrew. U'leviim gufayu minalim. Now, how do we know the Levites at that ceremony at Har Grizim and Har Eival with the blessings and the curses? How do we know it was said in Hebrew? Atya kol mi Moshe. We learn another Gzera Shava. We have a lot of Gzera Shavot today. If you remember, Gzera Shava always means you received it by tradition. You don't make up your own Gzera Shava. It's only if you learned it by tradition. We'll get back to this today. Atya kol mi Moshe. Okay, it says, K'tiv hacha kol ram. They would say the brachot, the blessings and the curses out loud. And it says the word kol. Uktiv hatam, when we got the Torah, it said, Moshe yidabel, v'Elohim ya'anenu b'kol. And God answered him with a voice. Now, God obviously was answering Moshe in Hebrew. So, malahalam b'lashon hakodesh, af kam b'lashon hakodesh. So the word kol is used as a Gzera Shava. Right now, that's what we're going to assume, even though we're going to raise another possibility later. But right now, our understanding is kol comes to teach you by the Levites at the ceremony at Har Eival and Har Grizim. From there, we're going to learn to chalitza and bikurim. Whenever it says anu v'amru, it means in Hebrew only. Chalitza ketza. But then by chalitza, remember we had this debate. One said it's from kacha. So we're now going to do what we did to Rebbe and the rabbis when they had that debate. There was a debate, really, what language could it be said? And here, everyone agrees it has to be said in Hebrew. It's just a matter of where you learn it from. So we're going to do a same ping pong of what each one does with the verse of the other. Rabbanan hai kacha mai avdele. What do the rabbis do with kacha? Mibaile ledavar shehu maaseh ma'akev. When it says kacha, this is how it's done, even though it's really saying this is what we do to a person who doesn't want to keep up his brother's name going. But what we're really saying, again, why choose the word kacha? It's to teach you have to do it in this way, meaning all the actions associated with chalitza, the removing of the shoe, the spitting on the floor in front of his face, all those things have to happen in order to make chalitza happen. The maasim are very important. Kacha, do it this way. Not having to do with language at all. Because again, the language they learn from the anu v'amru. The Rabbi Yehuda, where does he learn that halacha from? That the maaseh is ma'akev, he must hold that also. Miko kacha, because it says, could have said ko this way, and it said kacha, which adds an extra letter. From there, you can learn two things. What about the rabbis? Why don't they learn it from there? You know where this is going. They don't darshan ko kacha. That's not a real, they don't believe that that's something needing darshan. Okay, turning now to Amud Bet. But Rabbi Yehuda, we're still back to this ping pong. Rabbi Yehuda, if he learns it from kacha, then what does he do with v'anta v'amra? My avile. What does he do with v'anta v'amra? And now this is going to go reverse of what we did before. He's going to have a different understanding of the Levites in the ceremony at Har Grizim and Har Eival. He says the following. He goes the reverse. He says, kacha teaches you by chalitza. It has to be done in Hebrew. Once chalitza has to be done in Hebrew, and it says v'anta v'amra, we're going to learn from there to the Levites that they must have done it in Hebrew. And then he's not going to learn it from kol. So now they say, V'leilav kol mi Moshe. Why doesn't he learn kol mi Moshe? So the answer is, and this is why I said we come back to this, aniya gamyu, kol lo gamyu. He had a tradition that the Gzera Shava was the anu v'amru, and he didn't have a tradition of the Gzera Shava of kol. And therefore, this was his tradition, and that's why he teaches it in this way. Tanya Namihach, here's a support for Rabbi Yehuda's, this is how we understand Rabbi Yehuda, the way we just explained it. Because this was all just kind of our assumptions we made about Rabbi Yehuda. But here's a bright where he actually says it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Pomakom Shneimar Ko Hacha Aniya V'Amira Eino Ela Lashon HaKodesh. These are all words that connote Lashon HaKodesh. Ko, where do we have Ko, where it's Lashon HaKodesh? Ko Tevarchu, in Birkat Kohanim, right? The blessing of the priests. Kacha, the chalitza, and Aniya V'Amira, the Leviim. So what do you see here? He learns out the Aniya and Amira for the Levites from the chalitza, because first we start with chalitza and then we go there, the Aniya v'Amira by the Leviim and not kol by the Leviim, the way the Gemara did it earlier. Brachot uklalot kitzad. From here to the end of the daf, we're now going to go back to this long description of the ceremony of the blessings and the curses that was said in the Mishna, and we're going to go into, as I promised, different opinions about where the location of Har Grizim and Har Eival is. This week's flashback is going to be about this as well. I don't think it's up yet, but it will be up within the next few days because we're really going to be dealing with this over the course of the next few days. So make sure to look out for flashback because obviously the historic piece is interesting. And as Julie was telling us before class today, about all the archaeological things they found there in Har Grizim and Har Eival. So Har Grizim and Har Eival, according to what we call Har Grizim and Har Eival, is actually near Shechem, which matches the opinion we saw in our Mishna. However, as I promised, we're going to see this other opinion, right? There's difficulty with both opinions. The difficulty we pointed out yesterday is that it's very far from where they came into the land. Very hard to believe they went there right away and then came back to Gilgal and carried all those stones. On the other hand, there is no mountain that we know by tradition called Har Grizim and Har Eival next to the Jordan River near Gilgal and Jericho when they came into the land. Either it's some other mountain range that they also was called by the same name that happens, where this place is called by the same name. Or it, as I mentioned yesterday, some people say they put up two mounds and called them Har Grizim and Har Eival, which is a little strange to think. Anyway, but it also makes a lot more sense with the simple reading, though, that it would be right there. So anyway, we have these two sides, and what we're going to add into the picture today is the Shomronim, which is the people who live there now in that area are called Shomronim. They were the people, we've talked about them before, the Kutim, they're called Kutim Shomronim because they were brought into when the Assyrians moved the Israelites. This is before the destruction of the Judean kingdom, but the Israelite kingdom, where their capital was Shomron, they moved in these people from Kuta into this place, and they started to die by lions. So then they realized they were getting punished for something. They found from Cohen, who taught them the laws of the land. But what are they missing? They don't have the oral tradition that we have. So they have all these issues with the rabbi. The rabbis have issues with them. They have issues with the rabbis, but differences of opinion. One of the key things, which is not mentioned here explicitly, but you can imagine that it's possibly underlying, and some of the commentaries say this is what's underlying what we're going to get to, this big debate, is that they believe that when it says in the Torah that the place that I will choose, that God will choose, which we always believe is Jerusalem, they claim is Har Grizim, and that the Mizbeach wasn't built, by the way, on Har Eival. They have a different, besides that they don't have the oral tradition, they also have a few differences in the Torah, their written Torah, there's a few different changes. One of them is that the altar that they built in Har Eival was built in Har Grizim, and they believe that Har Grizim is the holy place. That's their belief. So this, you can imagine, caused a big uproar among the Jews, because what do you mean, a holy place, right? We don't want people creating doubts about things that we believe are basic. So the rabbis were against this whole thing. Anyway, with that background, we're going to start. So where we talked about the Chatam Sofer and the things he was fighting against, we go way back many other generations to also, it's interesting, the Mishnah Berurah called them kitot, right, which is the way we usually call these sects of, right, whether it's the Karaim or the Kutim, or right, had different beliefs. So brachot uklalot kitzad, kevan shavru Yisrael et hayarden, right, not to say they're comparable, I'm just saying this is how they viewed them. Okay, brachot uklalot kitzad, kevan shavru Yisrael et hayarden. So now we're going to bring, that's just a quote from the Mishnah, moving now to a Braita. Tanu Rabbanit. Halohema be'ever hayarden. So these are in Ever hayarden. Now, what does that mean? On the other side of the Yarden. So the simple reading is right on the other side of the Yarden. Right? This is the pasuk, Devarim, chapter 11, verse 30 that we've been reading, which basically describes in many, many words, and we're going to get to all those words today, where the location of these places is. So, be'ever hayarden. How do they explain Ever hayarden? They're not right across the Jordan. Me'ever hayarden va'elach. On the other side of the Jordan, they understand to me far on the other side of the Jordan, which would be Shechem, right? That's divrei Rabbi Yehuda, who's in our Mishnah. Next description in the verse, acharei derech mevo hashemesh. This is a very unclear line. After the path of the way the sun goes. Okay. Now, what they're going to assume after means is far from. Now, far from what? Far from where the sun blank. Makom shachama zoracha. Far from where the sun rises. Now, the sun rises on the east, which means it's in the west, right? Where's the Jordan? The Jordan's on the east side. And where's Shechem? It's more to the west, right? It's more in the center. So that's what it means. It means far from the east, meaning not right across the Jordan. Be'eretz ha'kna'aniya yoshev ba'arava, in the land of the Canaanites, which is in the plains, elu har Grizim v'har Eival sheyoshvim behem Kutim. This is a description of Har Grizim and Har Eival, where the Kutim live now. That's just a description of, if you want to know where we're talking about, this is what we're talking about. Mul ha-Gilgal. Now, this is a tricky part. Mul ha-Gilgal sounds opposite Gilgal, which sounds like it's near Gilgal. Now, Gilgal, we said, was by Jericho. Shechem is not there. Samuch le-Gilgal. It means near Gilgal. Not really near, but near in a very vague way. Meaning, maybe you could see it from there, when you're at the top of the mountain, you could see far. It faces. Okay, so when you're on the mountain, you can face Gilgal. Eitzel elonei moreh. Well, that's Shechem. How do we know that? We already saw in the Mishnah. And this is based again, and remember this, on Gzera Shava. Okay, again, another tradition. So here comes the Gzera Shava. There, when Avram went to Elon Moreh, it was by Shechem. Afkan, Shechem, here it also means Shechem. By the way, Elon Moreh, we think of as a place, Elon Moreh, but Elon Moreh means the oaks of Moreh. So oaks of Moreh is a very general term. It could mean different locations. So it's not necessarily that it's the oaks of Moreh that are opposite Shechem. It could be, there's oaks in this place, there's oaks in that place. And what Moreh means, it's different, it's a question, but the alone really means oaks. Tanya. So now we bring another Braita. I'm a Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosi. B'davar zeh ziyachti sifrei Kutim. Here we get to the big argument with the Kutim. Comes Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosi, and he says, I basically proved that the Kutim, their book is a forgery. Amarti lahem, I said to them, ziyaftem toratchem. You ruined your Torah, you forged, how do you say it? I can't think of how to say the right term, but you basically turned it into a forgery. Below ha'litem biyadchem klum. You didn't bring anything. In other words, you have falsified. Thank you. You falsified your Torah, and you didn't bring any proof whatsoever. Because how do we prove? Now, in the end, he's basically saying, I think that Har Grizim and Har Eival are in Shechem. And you think Har Grizim and Har Eival are in Shechem, right? That's where they live. That's where they believe is a holy place. He doesn't really disagree with them about that. But what does he say? How do we know it's Shechem? Based on our oral tradition, Zera Shava. So he says, Atem omrim elonei moreh Shechem. Af anu modim she'elonei moreh Shechem. We agree with you, but anu limdunua b'gzera shava. Atem b'ma lemadatum. We learn it from Gzera Shava. You claim we don't believe in the oral tradition. Well, obviously, you're deciding that Elon Moreh with Shechem is obviously learned by some sort of oral tradition, and you're claiming it's not, and yet then how do you get it? And he basically says, I can prove you wrong based on this, that you clearly, right, maybe you are relying on oral tradition, and then if so, why don't you rely on the rest of our oral tradition? That's why some people claim that he's really getting to the bigger issue, which is the fact that they think the holy place is Har Grizim, and basically saying, if you're going to include oral tradition, well, then you have to go all the way, or something along those lines. It's not 100% clear what he's saying to them, but he's clearly going out and attacking them about this issue. Now comes Rabbi Elazar, who has the other opinion. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Halohema be'ever hayarden. What does that mean? So he's going to give, and I'm reading the Gemara in one particular way. There's actually two ways to read it. I'm going to say that there's 5 arguments of Rabbi Elazar. Some people write all from this pasuk. Some people claim that 3, 4, and 5 are actually brought as questions against him. And they read the sugya differently. It's a reading in Rashi, but we're going to leave that aside right now. I'm going to go with these 5 are his proofs. Halohema be'ever hayarden. So what does that mean? Samuch liyarden. They're right near the Jordan, because the ime ever hayarden va'elach, if you want to say like Rabbi Yehuda said, it's far. Haloktiv va'yab avrachem et hayarden. It says when you cross the Jordan, which sounds like as soon as you get there, which means don't take a long trek at that point, but do it right there. Number 2. Continuing in the pasuk, acharei derech mevo hashemesh. Didn't we just say that means far from where the sun rises, which means it's on the west and not the east? What does he say? The exact opposite. Achar derech mevo hashemesh. What does it mean? Uva hashemesh. Mevo hashemesh is when the sun sets. Mekom shashemesh shokat, meaning far from where the sun sets. The sun sets in the west. Oh, it's far from that. It's in the east. Be'eretz haknani. Eretz Chivihu. What do you mean, Eretz Knani? You want to say it's Shechem? Here's where there gets to be different interpretations, but we'll go with this. Shechem is Eretz Chivi, not Eretz Knani. So if you wanted to describe Shechem, it would have said Eretz Chivi. It wouldn't have said the Chivim lived there and not the Canaanites. Hayoshev ba'arava. It's in the plains. What do you mean? Halo ben harim ugvaotim yoshvim. They're between mountains and hills. It's a mountainous area, Shechem, not a plains area. Mul ha-Gilgal, you want to say it's opposite the Gilgal? The pasuk says, what ha-Gilgal? You can't see the Gilgal from on top of Har Eival and Har Grizim. So basically, he claims it's right here next to the border. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer. So now, depending on how you read that, depends on how you read this, okay? And whether this is coming to go against Rabbi Elazar or to support him. But we're going to read it as it goes against him, because those were all Rabbi Elazar's claims. Now he comes and says, Lo ba'katuv, don't read the pasuk as it's describing, which is what we thought until now, the location, right, and where exactly these places are, and describes it in so many words. No, these psukim and all these words are referencing something else. They're about to go into the land. This is a big trek they're making right now, right? It's a new challenge. When was the first time they had a challenge like this? When they left Egypt. What did God do to protect them when they left Egypt? That's Barishonah in the beginning. He gave them the Ananei Kavod to guide them, right? They had these miraculous clouds, which basically showed them where to go. Or one cloud. Anyway, however you understand it. Now, then, in this case, God is saying, just like I protected you then, I'm going to protect you here, but more in a realistic way, not in a miraculous way, but I'm going to give you tips about how to go through the land. So now we're going to darshan all these words. Derech, right? Remember it said, derech mevo hashemesh. What does it mean, derech? B'derech l'chu v'lo b'sadot ukramim. Walk on the paths. Don't walk through the fields and the vineyards. It'll make it much more difficult for you. Hayoshev, right? Then it says hayoshev be'arava. So what does it mean, hayoshev? Why is it talking about settling? B'yishuv l'chu v'lo b'midbara. Go through the settlements. Don't walk through the desert. It's hard to walk through the desert. Ba'arava, in the plains. Ba'arava l'chu v'lo b'harim gvaot. Find yourself paths in between the mountains, because otherwise you're going to be going up and down mountains. It's going to be very complicated. So these are all tips about how to walk, how to go through the land. Okay, so that was a big debate, which we now finished, about where the location is, a very important debate, right, which has, again, it was ramifications more for then, but in terms of, was it right when they got over the border, or was it much farther away in Shechem? Tanu Rabbanan, but we're not done with this description of what exactly happened. Right now we want to know, we're only going to start this today. How did they cross the Jordan? What happened? So we're going to learn B'chol Yom, all the days when they traveled with the Aron nosea achal shnei dgalim. Remember, the Jews were camped by flags, by shvatim, by tribes. 2 tribes, 2 flags would go. After the, right, not 2 tribes, 2 flags, right? There were 4 flags. 2 flags would go, and then they would, the hayom nasa tchila, shene'emar hinei Aron brit adon, sorry, I didn't read that right. Aron nosea achal shnei dgalim, it would go after 2 of the flags. But on this day, nasa tchila. the Aron went first. Usually it was kind of protected, right? You wouldn't put the Aron first. It's like the most, it was chasuf in Hebrew, getting my words today, but unguarded at all, exposed. Thank you. So on this day, though, the Aron went first. How do we know this? Now we're going to quote Psukim when this actually took place. Again, we have the Psukim in the Torah, which describes what's supposed to happen. And then we have the Psukim in Yoshua, which describe as it happens. So it says, Hine Aron Abrit, Adon Kol Haaretz, Over Lefnehem. Okay, the Aron Abrit, which was holding the Luchot in it, and right, which is the Lord of the land. Okay, they treated it very, it was like as if God was in there, would go before them, went before them. B'chol yom v'yom, another change. Every day, Leviim nosim et Aaron. The Leviim carried it. V'hayom niseu kohanim. Today it was the kohanim on that day. Shneimar, again, pasuk from Yoshua, v'ikenoch kapot raglei kohanim nosei Aaron v'Hashem v'chulei. So there it says when they would put their feet down, and we're going to get to that pasuk soon, but not today, tomorrow. But what does it say? The kohanim who were carrying the Aron. So there you have it. They were the ones carrying the Aron, even though normally it was the Levites. Tanya, Rabbi Yosi Omer, now we're just going to point out a braita, we're breaking for a minute and saying, and with this will end, there were 3 unique occasions where the Kohanim carried the Aron. One is Shavuot HaYarden, this one when they crossed the Jordan. 2, Kshesevu Yericho, when they encircled Yericho for all those days, for 7 days, right? And then Kshechziru Limkomo. And they say here in the time of Shlomo, when Rashi says, Lebei Kodshei HaKodashim, when they brought it to the Kodesh Kodashim, V'yavo Kol Tzibnei Yisrael, V'yis'u HaKohanim et HaAron, Melachim Aleph Perek Chet. When they brought the Aron into the temple, the Kohanim carried. That's it for today. We'll just do a quick review of our daf. So we started with the Rebbe and the rabbis, and does it prove anything about whether the Torah said Chol Lashon or not? We didn't know exactly what it means the Torah said, but we had some options. Then we had Tefillas Rachamim, and that because of that, it could be said in any language, but then we said, what do you mean? You can't say in Aramaic. Does that mean any language? Does that mean just Aramaic? Saw the different options. And then we showed how historically something changed when the Reform movement began and the Orthodox reacted to the Reform, and that became a big point of contention between them, specifically about the Hebrew language. And do we have to keep the Hebrew language or not? And again, the Orthodox reacted more not because of halachic reasons, but because of what they were worried about what was to come, and it became a big central issue. Can we pray in other languages? And again, strict halacha seems to say no problem, particularly if you're in a community. Birkat Hamazon, benching, we said just makes sense. You're blessing God. Shvuat Eidut and Shvuat Pikadon because of this. Because they were one because of the language, the Shama, and the other because of the Zera Shava from there. Then we had the others that have to be said specifically in Hebrew. We had 2 ways of learning it. Is that brachot, we call it the central one because of kol, and then from there we learn to the others. Or is chalitza the one that says kacha, and from there we learn to the others. And then we got into the brachot and klalot, and we talked about the location of Har Grizim and Har Eival. Is it in Shechem, or is it right across the Jordan when they came into the land, more near Jericho, or not? And we got into the issue of the Kutim, and then we ended with how did they cross over the Jordan and what was different on that day, that the Kohanim were the ones carrying the Aron, as it happened on a few other occasions. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everybody a great day.